Now, today's discussion will be a masterclass, to say the least. We will focus on hotel or hospitality businesses' software as a service costs. These are or will be more important than ever as businesses realize the ease and flexibility and even the hygiene aspects of cloud computing. Our speaker today is Carson Booth. So much to say about Carson, so little time. Carson has been a global CIO and technology leader for many years, where most will remember him from. He's recently been CEO of Snapshot, but for me, although I know Carson from a previous work life, I got to know him for 2 years when he was chair of the first 2 ever high-tech Europe advisory councils, for which he was recognized in 2017 with the HFTP President's Award, which he was given mainly because he survived working with Selena and myself for all that time. He is from the US, but he's been working within Europe for 24 years in 5 separate countries and based in Berlin. So he is truly an international American. So with that, Carson, over to you.
Thanks, Carl. A few giggles in there. Hi, everybody. I'm going to try and share my screen because I did put some slides together. Haven't actually been able to put slides together for quite a while, so it's nice to dust off those skills. Let me know if those slides are up, Carl.
Yeah, they are.
All right, so let me just start by saying thank you. Thank you for the invitation. And wow, what a great list of attendees. Got a couple former bosses on here. I wasn't intimidated, but now I am. But let me just start and say first and foremost that I hope everyone is well. I hope your families are well. We're living in some crazy times. I put some thoughts together on these slides. It's only, I think, 9 or 8 content slides. I'm going to drain the text, but add some color around them as we go. I think it's going to be a lot more interesting for the dialogue that we have afterwards, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A. Selena and Carl, I guess as we go through this, if there's questions, hands will get raised, and you guys will interrupt me, correct?
Absolutely.
So let me just jump in here. So getting value from cloud services in today's environment. First and foremost, I think we should just define when we talk about optimizing cloud services, we're really trading the services and costs. And the tagline for the event is there at the bottom. So while we have the time, it's worth reviewing these kind of contracts and look for potential new services or applications that we can begin to consider. But I thought it was very important that we start with this definition. You're really trading services and cost at this point. Don't quote me on this slide. Again, kind of some thoughts thrown down, hyper generalized. But when you look at your SaaS providers, there's not a lot of room to flex on their cost side. You know, you have a lot of staffing. Some of that is fixed. There are some flexible staffing within that. And then some scalable as you scale up, et cetera. Same in the technology world. You know, your network is usually binary. It either works or it doesn't work. So it's relatively fixed. Your base compute processing is relatively fixed. There is some flexibility with storage and maybe some on-demand compute there, but generally the maintenance, the licensing, et cetera, is fixed. So when you look at and it's important to understand your SaaS customers or your SaaS suppliers really don't have too much flex. When you ask them to flex on cost, you'll start to see that they begin to dig into their own pockets relatively quickly. So the next few slides are going to be around these core 4 points on the left. So knowing the cloud, optimizing your spend, right-sizing the tech, and building long-term partnership value. And we're going to break those down very simply in an operational, technology, and relationship views. Jumping right in. So very important that you understand your cloud usage. And this starts by aggregating and inventorying your SaaS contracts. You know, where are they? What are the service levels? Are they defined? Are they clear? Who's using the apps? It's amazing. You know, you think about Dropbox, right? Somebody signs up for Dropbox, they forget the accounts there. So are the apps in use? Does everybody understand the value of the spend on these apps? And I love this next one, shadow IT. This has been a significant concern in the last 10 years. It's really come to the forefront with the appification and mobile apps, usually driven out of the marketing teams. They tend to have the money and they don't have the patience, and so they bypass tech and go straight to some sort of supplier or solution, and so create the shadow IT. So we need to be very careful around the expense and the security risks that these generate. We also need to make sure that we define and prioritize each app based upon business criticality. So at a minimum, we definitely need to aggregate our contract dates, the renewals, the renewal terms, et cetera, et cetera. Without having clear view of this, very hard to begin an optimization process. And most importantly, the key takeaway here is the central repository for all of your SaaS contracts, as well as the management process around them. So staying with the operational side, actually I'm going to minimize this. Staying with the operational side, let's take a look at, what are the steps that an organization can begin to take to go through this. And clearly it starts with a business review. The definition of who owns the app. They need to be assigned so they can be accountable for that. It's not a technology solution, it's a business solution. You need to perform scheduled reviews with the business. You need to look at things like the SLAs. Are they being met? Is support working? Is it not? So once you go in to begin your optimization conversation with your SaaS provider, you're going to go with business ammo that you can bring out and put on the table and have a conversation about. You need to make sure you understand the users. Have you optimized the licensing with the app owner? Per seat or user or concurrent users, you need to take a look at. Have you removed the departed users and the non-essential named users? This brings to mind Salesforce. Everybody says they need access to Salesforce. In reality, maybe you just need a report delivered to you and you don't need full access. So that's a seat that you can remove and therefore a cost you can remove. So you have to look to reduce those active seats. And some providers have concurrent user licensing, so you take a look at that. However, you do need to keep an eye on your security, your privacy, and GDPR requirements. As these systems have personal information or have access to personal information, they may have a requirement for named users, et cetera, for logging. You also should take a look at your API access and the data pools that are being driven from that with the analyst looking at that data. Have you optimized these pools? Is there a need to pull as frequently and as, the amount of data that they're pulling? So that might be another opportunity you can optimize. Terms around negotiating or renegotiating these contracts. It's not easy, but there are opportunities to allow flex based on business levels. Considering occupancy, a revenue share, or an app usage level, those are good starting points. You do need to consider unforeseen business events. COVID is a phenomenal example of this black swan event, that's hitting us. And I believe all SaaS providers have been asked to make reductions. So perhaps as you go into renegotiation, you should think about these kind of events in the future and look to put language in there around that. The alternative to strict language around that is also to negotiate around exchanging an immediate extension of a contract or taking a renewal of a contract that is due to expire in the coming weeks or years or months or years, and extending that and renewing it for a longer period of time in exchange for a reduction in your current pricing for let's say the next 3 months, 6 months, whatever it may be. There are providers out there that have considered this, and there are people out there that have had some success around this. You also need to look at your scheduled releases, your outage and maintenance windows, and not only are they coinciding with your, and having the lowest business impact, but you can also consider reduction in these release cycles. This is a direct opportunity for the provider to take support staff or upgrade staff out of that equation, or to think about you know, how they can save costs on their side instead of releasing, you know, from maintenance into production, these upgrades, et cetera. And I love this last one, this next one here. Do you really need 7 years of history? Carl and I were laughing earlier because 7 years of history, I think, is going to show a very odd blip for these last few months and for the next few months to come. So, you know, who even knows they have 7 years of history out there and where it sits? So, you know, do you really need to store all this data for those kind of periods? You know, these have a direct impact to your cost on long-term storage. So definitely take a look at that. Also, you can review and optimize the scaling, deployment, and your resource requirements. If you're in the middle of deploying new technology or upgrading technology, having a candid conversation with the supplier of that solution about, you know, your pause or about what kind of reduced resources that you can live with. You know, again, that saves the supplier money, and therefore you should be able to take advantage of that. It provides them a predictability going forward, and it also provides some trust. So looking at the technology, you also need to perform a technology review, and this includes looking at your networking, processing, and storage for over and under capacity. You know, you might be spinning disks and processors that you don't need to spin, so you can look to reduce that, take them offline, for example. You can also, and I know there's some big cloud providers out there that do a great job with dedicated processing or on-demand processing. In my former life, we had a major shift towards the on-demand, and you know, if you think about, it is more expensive on a, you know, compute per minute perspective, but you're not sitting there spinning idle. So definitely take a look at that and ask the provider to consider reviewing that with you. API performance is also another interesting element. You know, are there bottlenecks in the processing that you can take a look to optimize? You know, are you pulling data and putting it somewhere else that you don't need to do? And therefore paying, you know, either double storage or, you know, some, you know, networking impacts, or there's all kinds of elements around that. Offloading data to cold storage and reviewing these restore SLAs. You know, maybe you can reduce the requirement to bringing back any of that data as necessary, and therefore you can save some money there. Personally, I would offload cold storage as much as possible. Service levels, you know, it's very interesting when you start talking with the business about service levels, and you know, their eyes not only begin to glass over a little bit, but all of a sudden you start talking about what their acceptable downtime is, and their eyes get wide again. I think everyone on the call knows 99.9 is 44 minutes of outage versus 99.6. That's more than 2 hours, almost 3 hours of outage. You know, so having a candid conversation with not only the supplier, but also with the business on what level of outage is acceptable can help change some of these SLAs if they can flex on the supplier side. You know, this directly translates into reduction of SaaS support levels. It also helps in the processing, reducing processing and storage capacity and costs. Reviewing the response times and you know, the support response times and the resources around that. You know, taking a hard look at what app is most critical and going down that list and questioning, you know, do you need weekend support for that app? Do you need 3 shifts, 24 hours a day by 7? You know, can you reduce that to 2 shifts a day? You know, 2 by 5. So taking a look at that is an opportunity as well. And then also, what is the allowable data recovery point in time? You know, what level of data loss is okay? Is that data replicated anywhere else or not? Can you optimize that? So you need to take a look at the language in there and look at other opportunities around that. It also begs the question, you know, that age-old question, buy versus build. You know, are there services better suited to bringing back in-house and managing yourself? You know, my goal of this conversation is not to answer that, but to ask that question, to think about, and it's a serious question that you should consider. So in relationship, you know, trying to ensure trust and build a solid relationship with the supplier, in my opinion, is the most important. You know, you have to seek win-win opportunities. The large suppliers are very tough to work with, very tough to negotiate with. The small suppliers far more open to being flexible and having a conversation. You just need to be sure that you understand if you take money out of their pockets, you could cause some issues down the road for them. Every supplier, as I said at the very beginning, has fixed costs. You know, effectively, they're going to start to negotiate against themselves if you're really ready to, to leave. So you have to make sure that, this is not something easy for them to do as well. As I said before, large suppliers tend to be less flexible, but they are far more open to future opportunities and to leverage these opportunities into a deal for the day. You have to be careful with high risk in the business critical systems. In my opinion, you should probably start with these last. You don't want to run a service level down to the bare minimum and then have it fall over, and all of a sudden your business is at risk at that point. You have to focus on the future contracts and the opportunities, as well as the future of the relationship. Leveraging any RFP or services that you're thinking about as a current negotiation point, very interesting. We've, in my past, on both sides of the table, we've used this to great advantage. And this includes renewing and extending contracts earlier, and obtaining signing discounts or obtaining reduction in current fees for a particular period of time, or licenses or additional subscription and services. And nobody wants to give away free money, but a future value can be very interesting to these suppliers. However, you also need to be very careful when prepaying for services. Not only could it cause a cash flow problem to yourself and your business, but you tend to lock yourself in, which brings risk, as well as if that business doesn't survive, you've just poured the money out the window. So be very careful with that. And remember, you do have a competitive landscape. You do need to start thinking about what alternative services and solutions you can move to, but double check if you're ready for that change before you bring that as a threat. However, you have nothing to lose by asking. And I'll end with this quote here. I talked to somebody who basically said, I've got nothing to lose, because he's negotiating with a guy that has empty hotels. So in summary, then I'm very excited about the Q&A and dialogue. Review and be informed of where your contracts are, what they consist of, and how they're being managed. Look to optimize with your business partners. This cannot be done in isolation. All the stakeholders need to be at that table. And your existing suppliers are absolutely interested in building a better partnership, building a strong partnership value, and seeking those win-wins. So be safe. Thank you for the 10, 15 minutes or so that it's been. And over to Selena and Carl and open up for Q&A.
Thank you, Carson. Absolute masterclass. Thank you very much. I feel educated. Okay, question that came in on the registration from Greg Poirier at Xenia Hospitality, asking, what do you see on the 18-month horizon for data centers being used by hotel companies compared to the last 18 months? I don't know if he means data centers as pure as that, or whether he means the general usage thereof.
Well, I think a long-term view, I'm a big fan of cloud services. I'm a big fan of offloading, technology that's not core to your business. And PMS, for example, is not core to your business. It's a transactional system. You should be able to operate your hotel without a PMS. So therefore, I don't believe it's core. But, in the next 18 months, I think people are going to be focused on recovery from the pandemic and recovering from the business impacts there. The reality is, I think 18 months is probably too narrow of a window to look at for an increase in cloud services. I think if you look at the 24 to 36 month, absolutely. And as I said, I am a fan to move everything to the cloud as much as possible, retaining only what's critical to your business or core to your business.
Okay, great. Thank you. RP has got a question. RP, would you like to ask the question directly, as you're not driving this week to see the shuttle? He's finding the unmute button. There we go.
Hey, Carson. Good morning. How are you?
Hey, RP. Good to hear from you. All good.
Good, good. Basically, all SaaS models are fixed costs, and during these times like these costs are what's eating up the cash flow. How do we incorporate that as part of contractual relationships?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I touched on some of that. You know, speaking very openly with your suppliers about the current situation and seeking the win-win on maybe a reduction of the services along with a reduction of the cost is definitely an opportunity. As I said, I know some of the larger suppliers are effectively saying no, they don't want to open up that tidal wave. You know, and to be honest, I would look at your non-critical systems, and I would look at the smaller systems right now and the smaller suppliers.
Thank you.
Great. Carson, one of the questions that came in earlier, in terms of the systems that you know, so succinctly put in terms of what are in the cloud, what systems do you think are most important for going into the cloud? Because there will be properties or businesses that have still got on-site, on-premise systems. Do you think there's a priority list for particular systems going to the cloud before others?
Yeah, that's a great question, Carl. To be honest, I would try and offload as much as I could to the cloud. I would try and exit the technology management landscape as much as possible, keeping an eye on what systems are actually critical for my business. You know, if you think about a hotel, yes, you can operate without a PMS. Yes, you can operate without a res system. Painful. Yes, you can operate without a CRM. Probably more painful. But the reality is you can get guests in the hotel, walk them to the room with a room key and take their money when they check out. You know, you don't need a PMS to do that. Does it help? Absolutely. So, you know, you need to define what the criticality level is for that business and back up from there. So in my opinion, every system that you can get into the cloud and exit the management thereof is probably a good idea, with, again, the exception being what's critical to the business. And so, for example, in one of my very early career moves, we were deploying a new res system and then integration to the res system all the way down to the property level. You know, that became a critical solution for that business. And, you know, is that something that you would want to offload to a third party? Probably not, because it becomes a critical, part of your ecosystem and drives value to having a management contract with that company.
Okay, great. Paul West, you've got a question. You just took your earphones off, but yeah.
There we go. Space bar is not working, so I had to click. Carson, very good. All good points. And I like the fact that, and again, depending on the size, but I think there's an opportunity, as you say, with the partnership and sort of an available possibility for negotiations on both sides, win-win, and saying, like you said, extending your agreement in exchange for this or that. All those things are good, and I think they're hurting in so many places just like everybody else. So I think there's those opportunities. And when it comes to what is on premise and what maybe is not, what is in the cloud, in either case, there's a lot of things now, and I've been touting this since I published something back in the first week or so in Hotel Online about people working from home and the opportunities for access to be breached in some ways with distractions and whatnot. And that's why I think some places now you need a kind of this adaptive authentication so that people who are accessing these things now depending on where your system is, if it's in the cloud or you have access to it or you're hosting it, you may want to know not only who's logging in, but where they are, when they do, what device it is. All those kind of things are additional things to kind of open up and make sure you consider. But on the real side, I find more and more in the cloud. Remember these points of configuration. there seemed to be like a big issue and a big way for things to go south or have access, again, to someone who isn't there. So whoever that has that responsibility, part of your check and going and looking for shadow IT, all these things that you mentioned, excellent, is to make sure that the basics are set, the default settings on the configurations and things like that. Sort of kind of throw that out. So it was all great, and that's what I just thought of when you were talking. So.
Yeah, Paul, great points there. Really appreciate that.
Okay, Carson, I think Paul's question was, how can I put it? That was quite a technical, very IT-led question, if I can put it like that, for management of. Let's take it almost to the other extreme now. The question we've had in is, how would you advise, say, an independent hotelier with, I don't know, anywhere between 50 and 150, 200 bedrooms. They've furloughed off their staff. Maybe the IT person is furloughed off, and they've got to start thinking about this, and they're not an IT expert. What kind of advice, or not to say advice, how would you suggest they proceed?
Well, I think that's a great point, and this comes back to assigning the business partner on that app. I mean, if you're going to let your IT manager, take a break, forced break, then the person who's responsible for the actual business side of that app needs to understand that there's a service level they need to continue to monitor. It's kind of, and just coming back to the broader question, do we go to the cloud or not? We have moved housekeeping, for example, into a temporary worker environment because we believe that those resources we like to scale up and down, as demand needs. Well, same can be said with services going to the cloud, right? I mean, if it's not core to your business and you want some flexibility, then you can do that with cloud services. If you buy the system and plonk it on your property, then furlough your IT manager, that's going to be a little bit more of a challenge. At least with the cloud service, you have third-party eyes and support looking at it.
Okay. And let's take this middle ground, because I see we have a couple of club finance people. Hello, Daniel, in the audience, where we've got finance-led people managing their IT in their environments. More so than in the large hotel where you separate out the various roles. What kind of thought process would you be suggesting to those finance people to keep an eye on their software as a service costs? Is it the same thing, or would you give them a little bit more of a push?
It's a great opportunity for finance to engage beyond just looking at the expense line and to understand exactly what they're paying for and why. In my past, I've always enjoyed having finance in the room next to an operations guy and watching the two of them start to duke it out. It takes me out of the equation and trying to defend a system that I don't really own. I'm just trying to manage, and it's always fun to see how they can resolve their issues that way. So it's important to bring finance into the equation.
Right, but what would you be saying to them in terms of the way they look at it? Don't just focus on the cost line. Is that what you're saying? Look at the wider picture. Yeah,
I mean, again, at the very beginning of the slides, you're trading services and cost. Absolutely understand you have a cash flow concern, absolutely understand you need to reduce things, but understand if you're going to go after this cloud, this solution, you're going to exchange that for a reduction of services most likely. And so therefore it's important that the business is sitting at the table as well to understand the impact there.
Great. Okay, Stephanie has a question all the way from Spain. Stephanie, are you still with us?
I am.
Fantastic, go for it.
Though. It's okay. Carson, have you seen the IT providers offering new services to adapt to this situation that we're all facing? Or is it very much like we're waiting for the client to react and keeping in line with the contract, because there's much more that hoteliers could do and that we're not doing in the industry in terms of IT, because we're quite conservative. And I would have expected the suppliers to be, a bit more into it and be more partners rather than just, let them come.
Yeah, that's a great question, Stephanie. I have seen suppliers react behind the scenes they have, like the hotels, they have furloughed staff. They have, put sales teams and deployment teams, on furlough, for example. Development and support teams, my understanding from what I've seen, have continued, which is interesting. But I have not seen them pick up the phone to a client and say, hey, I have an idea for you. Why don't you stop paying me? That I think is more of an ad hoc. The supplier will look at the client and the value of that client and that client's desire, to consider an alternative, and then they'll start to negotiate.
Not just price, effectively. What I was thinking more is about a new type of service, because I think that a lot of big companies would say, okay, I will continue to pay, but try to give me an added value.
Yeah, so I was coming to that. So from brand new services, I think in the existing example and COVID as we're facing, I think it's taken everybody very quickly. Everyone's kind of holding their breath, waiting for it to pass over, and slowly people are beginning to realize that this is going to be around a while. So I have not personally seen a lot of immediate innovation and a lot of immediate services, being created and offered. But I would suspect that's going to start to kick in pretty soon.
Yeah, one area I've seen in this, Stephanie, is that some software PMS type businesses who've got extra add-ons started offering, they had a take-home service facility built in. And once hotels started doing takeout, because it was the only revenue generating thing, that particular software house offered that particular service free as part of their takeout. So I think there's maybe some adding pieces to it depending on where you are, who you are, what you are.
Yeah, absolutely, Carl. And I alluded to some of that in the deck, and this is an opportunity for, hotels and management teams to go and seek out and try these new services to see if they work. And then, maybe there's a 90-day use it, see if it helps you, and then sign up. Absolutely.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got Jade is one of Ian's students, I think. Jade, you've got a question, which is, I was half expecting, but not the way you phrased it. So Jade, go ahead, ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Hi, yes, correct. I'm one of Ian Miller's students. I'm actually working with him right now on our student business project. First of all, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. It was super insightful because we have been kind of looking a little bit into technology and also cloud as well. So my question is, as a young hotelier, we actually spend quite a large time of our lives kind of on 100% based cloud technology. So, G Suite and Dropbox, for example. So we're not really accustomed to another way of working. How do you think it will affect us as a generation of future users with this idea of technology and as hotel employees as well? How do you think it will influence this subject?
Well, so that's an excellent question. Let's start with just an element of history here. BYOD, bring your own device, in the industry, it's probably 15 years of conversation ever since the iPhone probably hit the market, and maybe a little bit of the BlackBerry before then. But the reality is, users have been asking for the mobilization of their access, and they want to cut their own cord. I mean, think of sales teams, right, and being empowered with mobile services. I think the generation that you're discussing has been a key driver to a lot of that in the last couple of years. But I think the biggest driver, right now is COVID. I mean, we as an industry and, the world, it's been proven that working from home is possible. Is it the best? Who knows? But, Zoom, take a look at Zoom, take a look at, a lot of these other things that are going on. And you'll see that all of a sudden, this legacy thinking, specifically in the hotel world, as long as you can address the security side of it, I think people are going to be a lot more interested, in allowing users to work remote. Facebook, I think, just announced something. Twitter's announced something. Google's announced a few things. Hotels, other than the people that need to be in the physical building, hotels, and management companies around them, they're going to do the same. There's a lot of money stored up in desks. in office buildings. There's a lot of money.
That's for sure.
That's good to know. Thank you so much.
I think that I think also Danny made a comment. Was it Danny who made a comment to on Jade's question there? Which effectively, Danny, do you want to make your comment on there? And if there's a question in it as well.
Yeah, thanks. And really, Jade, where I was coming from is you and your peer group are going to be the people that help drive these changes. To Carson's point, this industry changes technology direction very slowly. But there's a whole new level of normal that's going to be coming into the marketplace now, either because of work from home or because of expectations of the new graduates coming out of college and the use of personal technology and the ability to work from anywhere. The thought that you would have to go into a building in order to switch on a machine to actually do your job just doesn't make sense in 2020. But there's still a lot of technology in this industry that has that level of expectation. And I think it plays on the back end of Carson's overall presentation that the more you can take the technology out of buildings, the more you can make the technology available from anywhere, and more importantly, from any device, the more flexible you make it, and frankly, the more friendly you make it to people that are coming up in this industry. And it's just it's a new normal that we're going to have to get to from a technology perspective. Carson?
I mean, Danny's 100% right. And, the appification, the untethering, of our own, accounts and, the Netflixes and stream anywhere. And this is going to be seen as a normal. And when it's not available, it's going to be seen as an abnormal.
Yeah. Eric has got the inevitable question. I was waiting to see how long this would take. Eric, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, thanks, Carl. Yeah,
always welcome.
It's as much an observation as a question, really. I just wonder, I mean, there's been talk and there's been some action on occupancy-based pricing in the past with certain friends of ours that Carl will know well. And I just wondered, is that going to start to become more prevalent where a hotel can effectively pay for the use of the service by the number of rooms actually occupied rather than based on the number of rooms the hotel has?
So Eric, that's a great question. I think it's a question that's been out there, the industry's been considering for a long time. The supplier's been slow to adopt that. I've personally negotiated contracts that had a fixed fee per room. And that was, a portion of the total cost. And then there was a per occupied room uplift above that. So, there's a little bit of, shared in the success model with the supplier and the hotel. So, as the hotel was able to meet the base cost of running the solution, the uplift, as the hotel did better, the supplier did better. And, this was done with a very major software supplier to the industry. So it's not out of the question. It just comes down to your negotiation ability.
Yeah, I suspect that the occupancy-based pricing may have looked like one thing 6 months ago, and I reckon all the financial directors and the vendors, it's going to look like something completely different going forward in the future. That's for sure. Wouldn't you think, Carson? Yeah,
absolutely. Again, this is a rather strange blip on the radar for a long time.
Yeah. So Carson, you and I were talking earlier, and if we, you had a building and I invested in the building, and there were rooms in it, and we put bathrooms in the room, and we put locks on the doors, and we let those rooms out for a fee, and we called that, I don't know, the hotel business, say. But we had to have no technology on it. What would be your first two systems that you would put in the cloud into that business?
Well, definitely CRM, some sort of CRM. I mean, I'd like to understand who my customers are. If the business is large, if the hotel is large enough to where, you can't manually operate and do your accounting and finance and, night audits and all this stuff, then, PMS is probably the number two. This is also assuming that you're manually managing, your booking channels, et cetera. So, Carl, I think that's a hard question to define, top 1, 2, or 3. Top 1, definitely, in my opinion, CRM, knowing who your customers are and where they're coming from.
So you'd say CRM even before the PMS, because I know you said earlier PMS is not necessarily, the be all and end all, but you would definitely, I guess the whole industry started off with with almost a PMS, but a transactional based accounting system for guests in the hotel, which is almost the wrong end to start with, but you would start with the CRM today.
Yeah, I mean, if the industry hasn't realized that the PMS is not critical, it's a transactional system, and if it's a transactional system, it should be able to be replaced. If the industry doesn't know that yet, that's a big surprise to me. I mean, this has been growing for the last many years, and so where the true value comes in my opinion, is knowing your customers and what they're looking for and where they're coming from and where they're going.
Yeah. Now, you asked me a question earlier that I couldn't possibly answer, but we've got 50 odd people that we can sort of ask, but some of them are vendors. But it's an interesting question to ask: how many people would be looking to change their systems in this environment now?
Is that a question to me, Carl?
No, I reckon it's a question to the whole audience to see if we've got anybody who's looking at changing because they have the opportunity to change. Is there anybody there that would like to just share an experience there with us or ask us a question around what they're going through at the moment? Obviously not.
I have a question which
Carl, is Paul. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry. We'll come to you next, Eric.
Carl.
Yeah, go, Paul. Yeah. Paul.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, a bit delayed. Sorry, apologies. Yeah, we're moving away from a data center to Azure in the cloud. And part of why we're doing it is because, like I said when I talked a couple of weeks ago, it's like you're treating it your jumbo jets on the ground at the moment, and all the stuff you move is a lot less risky than when you're doing it full belt, running 17 hotels at one time. So we brought that project forward. And we brought it forward because we just deemed the risk of doing it was a lot less than it would have been doing it when we originally planned. And I think that's where people have got to look at the risk and the control that you can get, and maybe the resource and be more available.
Yeah.
Paul, you said, I didn't understand what the project was. You're moving to the cloud quicker?
We use an external data center for a lot of our systems are stored there, our accounting system and various other systems, and we're moving it all to Microsoft Azure in the cloud. We're at the point where we'd have to invest heavily again in the infrastructure. We also, as we look to expand, we would have harder challenges where by doing this route, we've got the ability to expand and buy the services we need. So it's part of our long-term plan as we bring Asia and Africa under Europe. But it was something we were going to do the end of the year, beginning of next year. And we've just taken the decision to jump on it now because of a lot less transactions, a lot more ability to get the right resource quickly on it.
Yeah, Paul, I think that's an excellent idea. As a matter of fact, I think your suppliers would be very open to, perhaps even incentivizing you to bring it forward because their revenues are being hit as well. So that's a great example, that we've been talking through. And, just Derek, sorry, I'm cutting you off just for another second. So I do know a major cruise line who has decided to begin all their upgrades on their ships, which is a perfect opportunity for them, similar to hotels. If you needed to do a renovation in a hotel, now's the time to do it.
Yeah, there's an interesting comment came in from David Pride here saying it's a great opportunity for change, but lack of cash flow for investors immediately stops or potentially stops new investment. I guess that's the challenge of a fractured ownership model in the hotel industry today, isn't it, Carson?
Yeah, and you have the replacement reserves that are supposed to be there, but I guarantee those are the first things that were asked to be stopped, from owners. So. You do need to save for a rainy day. The airlines, great example. They're all asking for bailouts and handouts now. Well, they had record profits the last couple of years. Where'd all that money go? So, I think it's a great opportunity that, you do need to save for a rainy day. It's hard, but you need to.
Yeah, well, now we know, don't we?
And you need to make these investments. I mean, when your business is down and your hotels are occupied, best time to make those investments.
I know a hotelier who said he only ever refurbished it during a downturn. Derek, I'm not sure if you've ever met Carson, but I believe you have a question for him.
Yes, purely by reputation only. And can I say your photograph doesn't do you justice? So I don't wish to be the harbinger of doom and gloom, but I've been speaking to a number of vendors over the last couple of months, and almost to a man, they have said that the hotels, their clients, have contacted them and they're going to withdraw, stop payment as the hotels are closed. The hotels don't have the revenue coming in, and pretty well all of the
did Derek lose his thought?
Derek, can you hear us?
I think he forgot to pay his meter.
Okay, there he is. He's back.
Right, I'm back.
Okay, go for it, Derek. Yeah.
Sorry.
We went.
Yeah. So basically, the vendors I've spoken to of either getting a reduced or no money in during the time the hotels are closed. So the question I have is, a lot of the smaller vendors, we know, not just in this industry, but an awful lot of them, unfortunately, are not going to come back. Should we be proactive as hoteliers, contacting the vendors and the suppliers of these services to say, look, you know, how do we ask them? Because if they are going to go through the hoop, we're going to want as much notice as possible in order to review and choose other people. And I think it is inevitable that some vendors are not going to come out of this, some of the smaller ones. So is there anything proactive that we can do to preempt that without being really hard on those guys?
That's a great question. You know, my experience at Snapshot was exactly that. You know, I had to make the phone calls to say, hey, we're gonna stop the commercial activity. And you know, it wasn't a result of the current economic situation, but it was, you know, a result of the desire of the parent company. We worked with the clients. We developed a change plan for them and helped them as much as possible. It's hard, Derek, I think, to answer that question. You know, and every company will be, you know, handling it differently. But I think it behooves all of us, as you know, on the other side of the table, to look at our suppliers and try and find, you know, kind of the weak ones out there and get a state of play. And this also comes back to what I said in the deck. You know, you got to keep an eye on the competitive landscape. You know, what is your alternative plan if your supplier goes out of business? You know, that's just good business risk planning.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that those discussions, I mean, you mentioned during the presentation, and it's something that I have mentioned many times, that it's better to have a partnership with your supplier than just, you know, a relationship whereby they supply whatever it is to you. And if you have a partnership, especially if it's with a smaller company, which I believe are more at risk as a result of COVID, it's a lot easier for you to approach them, and indeed for them to approach you to say, look, you know, we might have some issues. Can we talk through this together? I just feel that there's going to be some general managers out there in 2 or 3 months' time, who are suddenly going to, their IT manager is suddenly going to go and say, oh, you know, our supplier of these services is suddenly, you know, we had a letter today and they've gone bust. And,
well, and
like, you know, if you were a general manager, is that not something you should have anticipated, been aware of? I don't know.
Well, I mean, you definitely need to keep an eye on that. I mean, one thing that I've seen done in the past is, you know, put the IP in escrow. You know, the smaller organizations, you know, there might be, and if you're a big enough buyer for the smaller organizations, they might consider escrowing their IP. So if they do go bust, you can at least get to the code and, you know, and rebuild it. You know, when we were winding down Snapshot, you know, we opened the kimono to, you know, the largest clients that we had to make sure that they, you know, they could transition off of us and onto an alternative solution as quickly as possible. So it was effectively, you know, escrowing of the code.
Okay.
Okay. One last point. I think, Chris Atkin, you got an interesting comment about something you're working on. Are you still there, Chris?
Yes. Hi, Carl. How are you?
Very good. Thank you very much. Do you want to make your comment that you made in the
Yeah,
chat?
I was just saying there's a couple of clients I've been working with that, you know, obviously have experienced a lot of customers coming to them looking at ways in which they can, you know, furlough payments or extend payments, etc. And now looking at, you know, ways that they can develop business models that can be much more flexible in terms of both, you know, being able to move out some of the CapEx into OpEx, and also look at, you know, occupancy and, you know, how they can assist them to go from, you know, what is probably going to be 30-40% occupancy and then, you know, back up to, you know, probably 70-80% in a year or 18 months from now, depending on obviously the international travel situation. So I think, you know, there's a lot of people, I think, wanting to have conversations with suppliers around this. The difficulty is, you know, making sure that you really understand all your numbers and that you can, you know, have formulas that will allow you to adapt your pricing strategy accordingly.
Carson, comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think not much to comment on. I mean, we've discussed it in the past, and it's a good point, Christopher.
Yep. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Carson, absolute masterclass. Thank you very much indeed. I think we've covered all the questions that we had. I certainly, as I said, feel educated. Selena, just over to you to close us off. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Selena, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. And Carson, great to see you again. Thanks so much for being with us today. And thanks, everyone, for joining the Hangout today. Before we close, do remember that we do host the European Hangouts every Wednesday at 3 p.m. UK time. Join us next week, Wednesday, June 10th, with Bill LeBrun, Enterprise Strategist at Amazon Web Services and ex-CIO for McDonald's Restaurants, on the topic of 5 bets for the next 5 years, technology transformation in the restaurant and hotel business. Also, the Best of HFTP, including High Tech, the annual convention and the club forum is scheduled for October 26th to 29th in San Antonio, Texas. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we hope to see you back here next week.